you look at those policies in terms of what is it going to do to the economic condition of the country if you do it or don't do it, and does it fit within the debt to GDP range, so that we could start to encourage, Mr. Yarmouth talked about how you either cut spending or you raise taxes. Well, actually, there is a third option out there. Grow your economy. And that's what happens when you have the larger policy discussion. So debt to GDP became our metric to use. And by the way, that was a Sheldon Whitehouse recommendation. So I think if we could get back to the inconvenient truths of where we stand and make our constituents subject matter experts, it makes it a lot easier for us to enact meaningful legislation.
Chairman, just briefly, and Bobby, we worked together closely when I was in the House and also in the Senate. I've always enjoyed working with you, and reflecting on your comments and Mr. Peters' comments, Mr. Panetta's comments, Mr. Trone's comments, this is about finding common ground. That's what we've lost, the art of the deal was talked about earlier. And if you have an objective that everybody agrees to, which you get out of a commission, then you have to sign up to an objective. I mentioned earlier there needs to be some fiscal metric. That may be the hardest thing this commission has to do. Once you agree to that and everybody's on board, and this requires the leaders of Congress, Republicans and Democrats, to put the right people on this commission who actually want to get to an answer. Because it's too easy not to get to an answer around here and be benefited by it politically, whether it's the way the media treats you, because you can get on Meet the Press if you're going to be out there rabble-rousing. You can raise more money online, the way the political system is working in terms of our primaries. We got to get back to a system where we're serving the people, and that means agreeing on that objective. I think the commission is a vehicle to do that. Kind of along the lines of what my friend Ken Conrad just said, it will require this serious discussion. It'll force the Congress to deal with these issues rather than talking past each other, which is, in my experience, what's happened more and more over the past 30 years I've been in public service. So I sense you have an open mind, my friend. I hope you do, because I think this could be a catalyst.
I posed the question. I did want to make a quick comment about the balanced budget amendment. I think we ought to discuss whether that process would actually make it easier or harder to actually balance the budget. My view is the parameters of the balanced budget amendment would make it virtually impossible to ever get control of the budget. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. And from that exact point, I'll just highlight what Chairman Womack said. I mean, he focused on debt to GDP. Like, if we could make the focus on debt to GDP, we could actually have substantial ground that we could gain in this direction. If we make it, we even did. I mean, there are some in this committee that don't feel comfortable waiting for 10 years to get to a balanced budget. What we put the marker on, it's very difficult. 10 years. I mean, goodness, that's so far away for a lot of people. If we could get to a point where we were talking debt to GDP and putting those markers in place and establishing the guardrails so we could make that case, I think that's an addition to this piece. Using my newfound power as chair, I want to just make one quick comment to your first part. I have numerous times acknowledged that President Clinton was a key aspect, particularly with Mr. Panetta, a good friend, of finding a way to get to that balanced budget when a Democrat leads. But we cannot also dismiss the fact that oftentimes when there's a Democrat that takes the White House, what follows is a Republican Congress. And that friction also creates good outcomes for us to be able to make movements here. And so that happens in many, and when it moves the other way when there's a Republican. And so there's, to say that Republican presidents haven't cared about this, I don't think is fully accurate. And I'm willing to address it on both sides. The point I would like to quickly make, what we've gotten to the point where we've gotten in Congress is this once in a generation type of legislating that happens when you have the trifecta. When you have the White House, House, and Senate in one party, we have this knee-jerk reaction to go big. And that's not ultimately the best 2030 long-term approach to legislating. So we, 2017 made big, I think the Tax Cut and Jobs Act did an exceptional job of growing the economy, but we didn't take much advantage of finding areas to reduce our spending. That's a criticism I have of our own party. And the 2021 experience that I had when the trifecta existed in the Democrat Party, we had a $1.9 trillion bill in ARPA with no offset spending that whether you blame it, inflation all on that, I don't. I say there's a lot of factors that contribute it, but I agree with Larry Summers when say this was a huge contributor to our inflation. So we get into these modes of we have to go big now because we have the trifecta. We got White House, House, and Senate, and we can bypass the filibuster, so we got to go big. Instead, we're trying to do the opposite here and make something 30 years out. I have 4 kids, 10 and under. That's all I care about. I care what they're going to be doing. If they're sending $1 of tax and 50 cents of it goes to paying the interest when they get their first job, I will have failed my job right now. And I don't want to fail this job. So I just like to add some context there that we have these moments in split government to actually make some progress here. So thank you. With that, I appreciate the latitude that I gave myself, apparently. To yield now to Mr. Espaillat, gentleman from New York, to recognize him.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Budgets are political documents. They pretty much state what our values are, what do we believe in, how do we look at the state of the economy in America. Budgets they have a heartbeat, they have a pulse. And part of the problem in developing a fair and transparent budget that reflects the condition of America, hunger in America, people's inability to pay rent in America, the struggles of working families in America, is the fact that many of my colleagues in Congress are millionaires. And so as a result, they are unable to penetrate and reach out of the bubble and see what the American people are going through on a daily basis. And so, for example, the child tax credit program was referred to here as an entitlement. $2,000 for a 17-year-old or under. That results to $166.66 a month for a mom. Is that going to break our back? That's something that we cannot do for somebody that maybe is on a hunger line, trying to feed their families. The earned income tax credit for poor families that are making under $59,000 a year. Just a little push so they could maybe buy Pampers, milk, and maybe be able not to fall back on the rent. Is that going to break our backs? And so we propose a commission here. Some folk call that the paralysis of analysis. America is smart. They read through stuff. You know what they say out there, those that cannot go outside of the bubble because they just have so much money in their bank accounts that they don't have a clear vision? You want to kill a good idea? Build a commission. You want to stop innovativeness? Give it to a task force. You want to have deep cuts that cut to the bone like they try to do this year? Study it. Create a study group. This year we had an agreement between the leader of our House and the president. Some of us felt that they usurped appropriators like myself that constitutionally have the power of the purse. And that wasn't enough. They broke the agreement and they came here and they wanted to cut it to the bone. That mom that wants $166.66 per month through a child tax credit, they wanted to cut what some of you call entitlements to the bones. Now, revenue. Revenue is at the center of this because the Trump tax cut benefited the very wealthy, the very rich, not the police officer, not the teacher, not the civil servant, the very rich. That's an entitlement, a corporate entitlement. And that's right at the core, and it's not talked about, debt and deficit. So, Mr. Yarmouth, thank you for still having a fail grade in your lapel. And I want to hear from you, if you may. What is the role of these Trump tax cuts for the very rich in the current fiscal condition facing the nation?
You know, talking about tax cuts, thank you, Mr. Espaillat, for that question. I go back to my brother, who's been very successful in business and always voted Republican because he wanted to pay less tax. Well, back in 2008, he called me and he said, John, you'll be happy to know that Judy, his wife, Judy and I are maxing out to Barack Obama, and we're voting for all Democrats this year. And I said, that's great, Bob. What was your epiphany? and he said, he's in the barbecue business, barbecue restaurants. He said, I finally figured out that if nobody can afford barbecue, it doesn't matter what my tax rate is. And I think, in terms of, Chairman Moore's comment about debt to GDP ratio, there are an awful lot of economists now who say that's not a meaningful ratio. It doesn't really reflect the sustainability or indicate the sustainability of our debt. So, my fear about a commission is, yes, you could take the position that there's no harm in doing a commission. It does promote conversations, but there is some danger with a commission that makes recommendations that fail, because then the commission's failed, Congress has failed once again. So if you said, we're gonna do a commission which actually analyzes the question of debt sustainability and doesn't get into recommendations for cuts or increases and so forth, and really provides some education as opposed to suggestions, I might be much more inclined to accept that, because I think that would be a valuable thing for the country to have. Exactly what is the impact of our debt? Does it matter? How much can we live with? But again, if you're going to get into recommendations that ultimately are going to prove very difficult politically, then I think there's a real risk in doing a commission, and that's why I'm concerned about it.
And that's why I love that there's so many economists out there, because I oftentimes love to disagree with them. And I will vehemently disagree. The debt to GDP isn't a strong indicator of what we need to continue on. And to just make the point, as I move to our last questions here, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act was actually the impetus. It doubled our child tax credit. So we have to recognize, as making that point, child tax credit was doubled under the TCJA, right? And so this was is something that gets blamed in saying it was only for the rich, when it targeted the middle class, and making sure with the standard deduction as well. Like, that's just facts that there was there. And I get it. Like I've said, I've criticized everybody in the last 20 years, and that everybody falls into that. But I do think that's an important point to make. And moving on to our final speaker, and I think, folks, and if we have to have Mr. Yakim from Indiana is now recognized, and someone that has been an absolute breath of fresh air, just a month or two behind me on this, and part of this group that really wants to tackle this issue. So thank you, and you will be our final questions today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent to submit a Washington Post article by George F. Will into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you to our witnesses for being here today, to both of our former U.S. senators, to our current member, who happens to be my assigned mentor in Congress. Mr. Womack, I could not have asked for a better one. Thank you. And to our former member as well. I also have a few of my constituents who are here. Thanks for being here today. Our federal debt currently stands at over $33.5 trillion. That equates to a debt to GDP ratio of 124%. No one can look at these numbers and believe that the fiscal state of our nation is sound. These spending habits have led to serious economic problems, including inflation at a 40-year high under the Biden administration. This has made it much harder for the Hoosiers that I represent, and for all Americans, to provide for their families and plan for the future. Like many of us, I came to Washington to help build a better future for my constituents. But passing policies that consistently increase government spending is not building a better future. I fully support establishing a fiscal commission, but we need to carefully design it so that we don't actually do nothing, but we actually change this nation in the course of our fiscal stability. The last thing we need is another report outlining the problem while failing to make any tangible changes. We know what the problem is. The federal government spends too much money without regard to our national debt. Our fiscal house is not in order. And at a time of nearly $2 trillion in annual deficits, it's continuing to get worse. We need to restore fiscal responsibility immediately. Each of you served on one of the previous commissions aimed at taking control of our spending and restoring fiscal responsibility. My question is this: in your experience, what were the biggest hurdles that you faced in implementing the recommendations of previous commissions? And what would you recommend that we do differently to ensure that the commission's recommendations actually become law? I'd like to start with my House mentor, Mr. Womack.
Well, you raise a good question, and as I've said a couple of times in my testimony here today, the challenge with Congress is that we create commissions and we create task forces and we look at problem sets and we develop potential solutions, and then there's no real mechanism to give them the force of law. And so as a result of those, we look at them, they become shiny objects, and we acknowledge and brag about our great work, and it goes into our resume, but it never becomes, the law of the land. And so there has to be some mechanism in place that gives it the force of law. There's Congress just has too many areas, and we defer. We defer past milestones. We defer past holidays. We defer past elections. We defer. And it makes it easy, they call it kicking the can down the road. It makes it really easy to move it to the next milestone. Right now, we're on a continuing resolution till November the 17th. That's the next milestone. And we will do something that will move us past that milestone. And then the next milestone is going to be the holidays. And then the next milestone is going to probably be the 24 election. And so we just have to have some ability to be able to constrain Congress from moving past the moment to some future milestone and give it the force of law today. So if that can be accomplished, then I think we're well on our way to solving for the crisis. Now, the other thing I'll say, and then I'll finish, and that is, so much of what we're talking about today becomes what I call an inconvenient truth. And the American public we're afraid to tell the American public the inconvenient truth, because if you tell them what the problem is, they're going to want to know what the solution is, and as soon as you advocate for a solution, that trial balloon gets shot down before it gets 6 inches off the ground, and then you become a marked target. So those are the issues that we have to settle within ourselves, both sides of the aisle, and give us an opportunity to put this issue behind us, because it is a growing threat to our country.
Thank you, Congressman Womack. And Senator Portman, same question. What would you recommend that we do differently to ensure that the next commission that's set up actually makes recommendations that become law?
Yeah, good question. By the way, I appreciate your comments on not just laying out a problem, but actually coming up with a solution. The problem's pretty easy to describe, and everybody on both sides of the aisle has kind of railed on the problem from a different perspective. But the question is, how do you actually, again, come up with a metric that makes sense, whether it's a 10-year balanced budget, whether it's debt to GDP, and then have the objective of everybody there on that commission dedicated to trying to get there, to find that common ground. If you don't have that, it's not going to work. So I think that's maybe the most important thing. Second, I will say, just to the comment that some of these commissions or groups don't end up, getting passed. Again, 60% of Simpson-Bowles ended up getting passed by roughly 2015. I was on this super committee. It said it wasn't too super. Almost all of our suggestions ended up getting incorporated over time. It's amazing, because members of Congress were desperate to find, some proposals, and the super committee looked at this, even though the super committee itself failed to get a majority vote. The ideas and the research that was done was very helpful. And then finally, as we talked earlier, just raising the visibility of this issue, forcing Congress to deal with it. But I would say, to answer your question more directly, the other most important aspect, other than having this objective, having the commitment to find that common ground, would be having a up or down vote. So I think you've got to have the ability to have an expedited procedure in the United States Senate, and then to have a vote. As you know, the Senate's a tougher body to deal with regard to the rules, and then the House, not just the 60 votes, but the fact that things can get hung up. So you have to have an expedited procedure, and eventually force a vote, force the ability of this Congress to come together and make a tough vote, tough decisions. As I said earlier, I think what the commission gives you is hopefully trust. It builds trust by choosing the right people and the right experts and just being straight like you are in Indiana and the Midwest, and just telling people this is what it's about. Second is, I do think it provides some knowledge, information that maybe not everybody has, but you'll have people who are really targeted and focused on this issue. And I think Mr. Yarmouth and others who talked about that would be a good thing about it. And then third, if you have a commission that's going to report, it does provide a little political cover. And people say, well, maybe, we don't need political cover in here. Well, obviously we do, because, nothing else has worked. And the cover is, hey, this isn't perfect, not what I would have done exactly, but on the other hand, $33 trillion. Your 4 boys, your kids and grandkids. I mean, this is something that, we have to suck it up and do the right thing for the country. So I think those are the ingredients for success.
Thank you, Senator Portman, and Mr. Chairman, thank you for chairing this committee hearing today on the biggest domestic.
Mr. Yakum, could I interject one thing?
Please.
This whole discussion about the budget process, this whole discussion about the debt commission, this whole discussion about the fiscal condition of our country, and back to your question about what we can do to put some teeth into it and to constrain Congress, it reminds me of the cab drive I had in Cairo, Egypt, when I was deployed back in 2002, right after 9/11. We're driving down the road in a cab, and it's all over the road, and it's a 3-wide lane, and there's 4-wide traffic. And I asked the cab driver, I said, hey man, do you not see the lines in the road? And he looked at me and he said, those are merely a suggestion. And that's exactly how I would describe the process that the U.S. Congress uses to manage its budgets, and precisely why we are in the condition we're in. I yield back.
I could not agree more, and thank you, Congressman Womack. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
And I couldn't come up with better comments to end on than all of that. Very clear statements about the need for this and putting it into perspective. So thank you all. Thank you, Senators Portman and Conrad, and Chairmans Womack and Yarmouth, all dedicated public servants and willing to have made a mark on this place and continuing to do so. So thank you all very much. Please be advised that members may submit written questions to be answered later in writing. Those questions and your answers will be made part of the formal hearing record. Any members who wish to submit questions for the record may do so within 7 days. And with that, committee stands adjourned.